If you touch her again, I swear I'll bring your whole empire down." That sentence didn't belong in a ballroom. It didn't belong among crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, and polite laughter polished to perfection. It didn't belong under the vaulted ceiling of Crystal Manor, Houston, where the city's wealthiest gathered to drape themselves in the fragrance of charity. But it was spoken, clear, sharp, uninvited. And the most horrifying part wasn't the sentence itself. It was that before it, everyone had seen the slap. The gala was a theater of wealth. Soft jazz played in the background, smooth as deception. The MC read names of donors while numbers glowed across a massive LED wall, not for hungry children, but for hungry egos. In the middle of it all stood Leonard Rowan, 44, CEO of Rowan Technologies, worth $1.8 billion, the kind of man whose handshake could alter the fate of a contract in Dallas. His suit was dark blue, his cufflinks gleamed platinum, his smile was cut from the same alloy as his power. And then he struck his wife. Not a hidden slap, not a private argument. A clean, public, echoing crack that sliced through jazz and laughter alike. Amelia Rowan fell to her knees. Her silk gown shimmered beneath the chandelier, soft champagne in color, the same shade as the drink now trembling in the hands of waiters who didn't dare move. 6 months pregnant, her belly curved beneath the satin like a fragile promise. She wrapped her arm around it instinctively, that simple, desperate motion of a mother fearing the blow might reach her child. No one spoke. A woman gasped and covered her mouth. A man looked away. A security guard shifted his stance, then froze. The MC, caught mid-sentence, let out a nervous laugh and continued his script. The orchestra played on. Because money, like music, knows how to keep going when morality stops. In the shadow of a marble pillar stood Ethan Cole, 32, janitor of Crystal Manor. He had been working the night shift for 3 years. He wore a blue uniform, the fabric faded around the elbows. His cart stood beside him. Mop, disinfectant, the dull rhythm of survival. People didn't notice Ethan. He'd learned that invisibility was a kind of protection. The fewer eyes on you, the longer you lasted. He had one reason to last. Noah, his 7-year-old son. That morning, Noah had handed him a crayon drawing, uneven letters at the bottom spelling, "My dad is my hero." Ethan had folded it and tucked it in his chest pocket. He'd thought it would bring him luck. He hadn't known it would give him courage. When the slap came, Ethan's body stiffened. Every instinct told him, stay silent. He'd seen men lose everything for less. He'd been one of them. 3 years ago, when his wife left, he'd learned how fragile dignity was. Now silence was his shield. It kept the rent paid, the cereal on the table, and the promise of pizza next week alive. But then he saw Amelia's hand on her stomach, and that shield shattered. He remembered another night, long ago. Another argument, another woman holding her belly. He hadn't spoken then, and silence had taken everything. His fingers brushed the folded paper in his pocket. My dad is my hero. He straightened. He stepped out. From the corner of the ballroom, a man in a janitor's uniform began walking toward the center. The mop wheels squeaked softly against the marble floor. At first, no one noticed. Then, one by one, heads turned. He looked out of place, walking past glittering gowns and tuxedos. Leonard's voice, low and venomous, cut through the air. I told you not to talk to him, Amelia. Do you want to embarrass me again? Please stop, Ethan said, standing 3 meters away. His voice was calm but steady. She's pregnant. It was almost a whisper, but the silence made it thunder. Every head turned. Every camera phone froze mid-air, unsure whether to record or not. The jazz stopped. The chandelier light seemed to dim. Leonard turned. "What did you say?" "Please stop," Ethan repeated, clearer this time. "She's pregnant." The entire ballroom became a photograph. Frozen, polished, terrified. A senator, a socialite, a CEO, all witnesses, all cowards, each pretending the janitor didn't exist. Leonard took a step forward, his smile sharp as glass. He slapped Ethan across the face. The sound carried. A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Someone muttered, "It's not our business." Someone else looked down, ashamed of their reflection in the champagne glass. Leonard leaned close. "You think anyone will believe a janitor like you?" Ethan's cheek burned. Blood filled his mouth. He could walk away now. He could save his job, his rent, his fragile routine. But then he thought of Noah, of the little boy who believed his father was a hero. He wiped the blood from his lip, raised his eyes, and said quietly, "Maybe no one will believe me, but my son will." It was the kind of sentence that didn't echo. It lingered, like a match dropped in a room full of gas. The manager hurried over, panic in his voice. "Ethan, step back, you're done here." Leonard didn't even look at him. "Fire him, now!" Security moved forward. Ethan didn't resist. As they led him toward the service door, he looked back once, at Amelia, still on the floor, one hand on her stomach. Their eyes met. No words. Just the unspoken recognition between two people trapped by the same silence. The band resumed. Laughter returned. The gala went on, pretending nothing had happened. But the night had changed. A janitor had spoken in a room where no one else dared. And though he'd lose everything for it, he'd already won the only thing that mattered. When he looked at that crayon drawing again, he'd know it wasn't a lie. Outside, Houston's air was thick and warm. Ethan stepped into the night, blood still at the corner of his mouth, breath trembling. But his silence, at last, was broken. And that was how it all began. The morning after the gala smelled of cheap coffee and burnt toast. In a one-bedroom apartment off Westheimer Street, the world was small, the kind of small that echoed when a child laughed. A cracked window let in the sound of buses, sirens, and the soft hum of life continuing for everyone else. Ethan Cole sat at the small wooden table, facing his son, Noah. Between them was a bowl of cereal, one bowl shared. The milk was watered down. "Eat up, champ," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "When will we have pizza again?" Noah asked, spoon dangling. "Next week," Ethan promised. The same promise he'd made last week. The boy nodded, satisfied. Children believe in tomorrow more easily than adults do. Ethan watched him eat. The freckles on Noah's cheeks, the way his hair curled over his ears. Those were the details that kept Ethan from falling apart. Every single day he built his purpose around this small boy. But this morning, the bruise on Ethan's face ached with a quiet truth. He was unemployed. 3 years ago, he hadn't been a janitor. He'd been a certified electrical technician, the kind of man who knew how to make broken things work again. He loved that, fixing what others gave up on. Until the layoffs came, until the factory downsized, until his wife packed her suitcase and said she couldn't live on hope anymore. She left a note. "You're a good man, Ethan. Just not enough for this world." And maybe she was right. He tried to hold it together for Noah, took part-time gigs, learned to smile through exhaustion. When Crystal Manor offered a steady night-shift janitor job, he took it without hesitation. It wasn't dignity, it was survival. The walls of the apartment were thin. From next door came the muffled sound of a baby crying. Upstairs, someone argued in Spanish. The air smelled faintly of bleach. Ethan had brought home leftover cleaning supplies from work. A single painting hung above the table, Noah's drawing, "My dad is my hero," taped proudly like a flag of defiance. Next to it sat a stuffed teddy bear, missing an ear, one eye restitched with blue thread. The teddy bear had been Noah's since he was 3. It had survived spilled milk, sleepless nights, and 100 hugs. Ethan kept fixing it each time it tore, maybe because it reminded him that broken things could still be loved. He sipped his coffee. It was bitter, but it kept him grounded. Noah finished his cereal and began packing his little backpack. Inside were pencils, a notebook, and a paper airplane he was too proud to throw away. "Dad?" the boy said, glancing up. "Are you okay?" Ethan hesitated. He thought about lying, about saying the bruise was from bumping into a ladder. But instead, he touched the mark on his cheek and smiled faintly. "Yeah, just slipped at work, buddy. No big deal." Noah nodded, not fully convinced, but he didn't press. He zipped his backpack and hugged his father's waist before running toward the door. "I'll draw something new for you today." "I can't wait," Ethan said, and he meant it. When the door closed, the apartment felt too quiet. Ethan sat at the table for a long time. His phone buzzed. A notification from his manager. "You are suspended pending review. Do not return to work until further notice." No explanation, no signature, just the coldness of a machine-generated message. He stared at it, the words burning. He had expected this. Leonard Rowan was too powerful, too connected. A single phone call, and Ethan's name would vanish from every cleaning company in Houston. He turned off the phone and exhaled slowly. He'd lived his entire life understanding that silence was safety. He'd watched his father lose a job after speaking out against a supervisor. He'd seen neighbors evicted for asking questions. He'd built his own world on one rule: stay quiet, stay alive. But last night, silence had turned into sin. The television murmured from the corner, a local news anchor reporting about the gala. Last night's charity event hosted by Rowan Technologies raised over $7 million for education reform. Not a single word about Amelia. Not a single whisper about the slap. Ethan's fists clenched. The truth had been erased overnight, cleaned up better than any floor he'd ever polished. He remembered her face, pale, terrified, yet dignified. The way she'd looked at him as they dragged him away. There had been something in her eyes, something he couldn't forget. Gratitude tangled with despair. He looked down at the stuffed bear, then at the crayon drawing. "My dad is my hero." He wondered what heroes did when the world didn't notice them. At 2 p.m., he picked up Noah from school. The boy ran into his arms, backpack bouncing, laughter pure and loud. Ethan's fatigue melted instantly. They walked home hand in hand. Noah talked about dinosaurs and art class. Ethan nodded, half listening, half trapped in thought. When they reached the apartment, Noah flopped onto the couch, watching cartoons, while Ethan sat at the window, staring at the city beyond the glass. Cars, billboards, towers of glass and money. The same kind of world that had taught him to bow his head. He opened his old toolbox from the closet. Inside were relics of another life. A voltage meter, a screwdriver, a rusted company badge from Solar Tech Industries. He turned the badge over in his hand. The name Ethan Cole, senior technician, was still faintly legible. He whispered to himself, "How did I get here?" The question hung heavy. That night, after Noah fell asleep clutching his half-eared teddy bear, Ethan sat by the small window. The city glowed in distant amber light. Somewhere out there, Leonard Rowan was probably sipping wine, giving interviews, kissing his wife's bruises in private before doing it again. And the world would stay silent. Ethan opened his phone and stared at the blank screen of the camera. He almost hit record, almost said something, almost told the world what happened. But then he thought of Noah, the threats that could come, the doors that would close. He locked the phone and put it away. For now, he told himself, silence was still safer. He turned off the lamp, letting the dark fold around him, but inside his chest, something small, a spark, a whisper, refused to go out. Because deep down, Ethan knew, silence may protect you, but it also kills you, one quiet day at a time. And that realization was the beginning of change. The gala had ended, but its echo refused to die. By the next morning, the news outlets were already flooded with praise for Rowan Technologies' charitable success. Not a single line mentioned the slap. Not a single image showed the janitor who had spoken. Silence, once again, was polished into perfection, just like the marble floors Ethan had cleaned for years. He sat outside a small diner on the corner of Travis Street, staring at the mug of coffee that had gone cold. The bruise on his face had turned from red to violet, an ugly bloom of defiance. The city around him was busy pretending to be moral. Across the street, a billboard gleamed. Leonard Rowan, building the future of AI and humanity. Ethan almost laughed. Humanity. Inside the diner, waiters carried trays, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. To most of them, he was just another man between jobs, not a symbol of anything. He liked that anonymity, but today it felt heavier. He couldn't shake the sound of that slap, the silence after, and Amelia's eyes, the look of someone who wanted to speak but had forgotten how. He thought about the way Leonard's voice had sliced through the room. "You think anyone will believe a janitor like you?" And he realized the man was right. The world didn't believe people like him. When he got home, Noah ran to greet him. "Dad, did you bring pizza?" Ethan smiled weakly. "Next week, buddy." He ruffled Noah's hair, trying to hide the bruise beneath the shadow of his hand. The boy held up a new drawing, this time of two stick figures holding hands. "That's me and you, Dad," Noah said proudly. "You're smiling again." Ethan swallowed hard. "That's beautiful, kiddo." But inside, his chest burned with something that wasn't pain. It was guilt, for knowing that last night, a woman had been hurt in front of him, and even though he'd spoken, it hadn't been enough. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the small window, the city lights blinking like tired eyes. He replayed the scene over and over, wondering if he could have done more. In his mind, he saw the faces of those who'd watched, the lawyer pretending to check his phone, the influencer smiling stiffly, the senator's wife whispering, "Don't look." They were the real reflection of power, not in what they said, but in what they refused to. And he had stood in front of them, trembling but upright, a man with nothing but truth in his throat. He'd always believed in being invisible, but now, invisibility felt like complicity. At Crystal Manor, word spread quickly. By noon, his badge access had been deactivated. A formal letter arrived that same afternoon. Violation of professional conduct, termination effective immediately. Ethan read it twice, then folded it carefully, placing it beside Noah's drawing, as if the two pieces of paper were speaking to each other. The phone rang. His friend from maintenance, Ryan Torres, whispered through the static. "Man, you really did it." "Did what?" Ethan asked. "You said something in front of him." "Yeah," Ethan sighed. "And now I don't have a job." Ryan hesitated. "Listen, I was there. I saw everything. They're trying to erase it, deleting security footage, making the staff sign NDAs. But what?" I made a copy from one of the hallway cameras. He'd caught the slap. Ethan froze. His heartbeat quickened. You what? I don't know why. Maybe because I couldn't sleep either, Ryan said quietly. Meet me tomorrow. Same coffee shop. That night, Ethan sat on the floor beside Noah's bed. The boy slept deeply, clutching his half-eared teddy bear. Ethan brushed a hand over his son's hair, whispering, I don't want you to grow up thinking silence is safe. He opened his laptop, an old, cracked Dell that took 5 minutes to boot. He stared at the screen, cursor blinking, daring him to act. He hesitated. Then he opened the camera app. His reflection stared back. Tired, bruised, unshaven. He began recording. My name is Ethan Cole. I don't have money. I don't have lawyers. But last night, I saw something no one should ignore. At the Crystal Manor Charity Gala, Leonard Rowan, CEO of Rowan Technologies, hid his pregnant wife, Amelia Rowan, in front of 100 people. Everyone stayed silent, except me. I was fired today for speaking up, but I'd rather lose my job than my soul. My son thinks I'm his hero. I'm trying to deserve that. He stopped the recording, hands trembling. The video was raw, no edits, no filters, just truth. He uploaded it to YouTube under the title, The Night No One Spoke, by a janitor who did. He stared at the progress bar as it crept forward. 23%, 47%, 100%. Upload complete. For a long time, he just sat there. The silence in the room was thick but different now, not empty but waiting. Meanwhile, across town in the penthouse of Rowan Tower, Leonard was on the phone with his legal team. He paced across the marble floor, voice low and controlled. Contain it. Every clip, every word. I want it gone by morning. Yes, sir, came the reply. Amelia lay in the next room, staring at the ceiling, a bruise blooming on her cheek. She heard the muffled echo of her husband's voice, that same calm cruelty. She turned her face toward the window, one hand resting on her stomach. Somewhere in her mind, she replayed the moment from last night. The janitor's voice trembling but steady. Please stop. She's pregnant. A tear slipped down her temple. For the first time in years, she whispered to the darkness, Maybe I'm not alone. At dawn, Ethan's phone buzzed. The video had reached 10,000 views overnight. By the time Noah woke up and rubbed his sleepy eyes, it had crossed 100,000. The comments were pouring in. Some called him brave, some called him crazy, but one comment pinned to the top made Ethan stare. I believe you. Clara Hensley, independent journalist. He didn't know it yet, but that single message would change everything, because for the first time, his voice had found an echo, and that echo was about to become a storm. The day the internet discovered his face, Ethan Cole became a target. By noon, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Some messages were kind, some were cruel. Most were noise, the kind of digital storm that devours lives. He turned off notifications and held the device like something radioactive. Noah was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in his faded blanket, cartoons frozen on the screen. Ethan switched off the TV and watched the boy breathe, his chest rising and falling like a small ocean. Outside, Houston baked under the sun. Inside, the silence was heavy with uncertainty. He'd expected backlash, but not this fast. At 9:17 a.m., a new email appeared. Subject, Notice of Legal Action. From Rowan Technologies Legal Department. To E. Cole at Personal Mail. Mr. Cole, your recent video contains defamatory statements against our client, Mr. Leonard Rowan. Cease all communication and remove the content immediately. Failure to comply will result in litigation. Regards, Davidson and Ames Law Group. Ethan read it 3 times. His stomach turned cold. Litigation. He didn't even have enough money for next month's rent, let alone lawyers. He opened YouTube. The video had passed 5 million views. Comments scrolled endlessly. Some accused him of fabricating everything. Some demanded justice. Others just wanted entertainment. The janitor versus the billionaire. That word, janitor, echoed like a brand. He thought of deleting it all. He hovered over the remove button. His hand trembled. Then Noah's drawing caught his eye on the wall. My dad is my hero. The letters uneven, brave, honest. He lowered his hand. If he backed down now, that drawing would turn into a lie. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Ethan froze. Through the peephole, he saw a delivery boy in a black cap holding a brown envelope. Mr. Cole? Yes? Delivery from, corporate. Ethan signed the receipt and shut the door. The envelope contained a printed letter, same as the email, but stamped with Rowan Technologies' embossed logo. It wasn't just intimidation. It was theater. He tore it in half, dropped it in the trash, and sat at the table. He needed air. He needed to think. But before he could stand, his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. You made a mistake. Watch your son. The room spun. His hands went numb. He looked toward Noah, still on the couch, peacefully building Lego towers. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He locked the door, drew the blinds, sat down beside his boy. That afternoon, at a rundown cafe near Midtown, Ethan met Ryan Torres, the maintenance worker who'd called him the day before. Ryan was 30, rough around the edges but loyal. He wore a faded baseball cap and smelled faintly of motor oil. He glanced around before sitting. Man, you're trending like crazy, Ryan whispered. You broke the internet. Ethan didn't smile. They're threatening to sue me. And now someone's threatening my kid. Ryan hesitated, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small USB drive, its plastic casing cracked near the edge. I got this from the security server, he said quietly. Back hallway camera, same time the gala was live. Ethan's heart pounded. You mean? Yeah, Ryan nodded. It caught the whole thing. The slap, the guests, everything. The official feed got wiped, but this one's from an auxiliary backup. It shouldn't exist. Ethan took the drive carefully, like holding a match in a hurricane. Why are you helping me? Ryan shrugged. Because I saw her face. And because I got a sister who once said no one would believe her either. They sat in silence for a while. 2 men who'd learned that truth always came with a price tag. That night, Ethan plugged the USB into his old laptop. The video file opened. Grainy, low resolution, but real. There it was. Leonard raising his hand. The slap. Amelia falling. And Ethan, stepping forward, trembling, saying, Please stop. She's pregnant. He watched it twice. 3 times. Every frame burned itself into his memory. It wasn't perfect evidence, but it was enough. He opened his camera again. The bruise on his cheek had darkened to deep purple. He looked like a man who had lost everything except the truth. He hit record. My name is Ethan Cole. They told me to delete my video. They said they'd sue me. They said they'd hurt me. But this, he held up the USB. This is the truth they tried to bury. I'm not doing this for fame or revenge. I'm doing this because silence kills people. And because I want my son to know that sometimes standing up means standing alone. He uploaded the new video. It was titled, The Footage They Tried to Erase. He sat back, exhausted. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, low, distant, like a warning. Across town, in a private hospital suite, Amelia Rowan watched the same video on her phone. Her nurse, Maria Alvarez, stood quietly by the door. "Are you sure you should watch this, Mrs. Rowan?" Amelia didn't answer. Her fingers trembled as she paused the video on Ethan's face. "He's telling the truth," she whispered. "And they're going to destroy him for it." Maria hesitated. "Then maybe it's time someone else spoke too." Amelia turned toward the window. The reflection staring back wasn't the glamorous philanthropist on magazine covers. It was a woman with a bruise and a heartbeat she wasn't sure belonged to her or the baby inside her, and for the first time she whispered words she hadn't said in years. "I'm not afraid anymore." Back in Ethan's apartment, Noah slept soundly. Ethan sat at the table, the laptop screen casting a faint glow over his tired face. The new video had already crossed 1 million views in 4 hours. He knew what would come next. Lawyers, defamation claims, smear campaigns. But something in his chest felt lighter. Not hope, exactly. Just release. He whispered to himself, like a prayer no one would hear. "I don't have money. I don't have lawyers. I only have the truth." He looked at the teddy bear beside Noah, its missing ear stitched once again. Some things, he thought, were worth repairing no matter how many times they broke. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath fear, beneath exhaustion, a small, steady belief began to form. That maybe, just maybe, truth could still survive the noise. And far away in a quiet hospital room, Amelia reached for her phone again. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She opened a blank note and typed 3 words. "I will speak." Her hand trembled. But she pressed save. Because tomorrow the world would hear her voice. And silence would finally have an answer. The world has a strange way of deciding who gets to be heard. By morning, Ethan's second video, the footage they tried to erase, had passed 5 million views. By noon, it was 10. By sunset, it was a wildfire. Every news outlet wanted a piece of him. Every blogger wanted an angle. Every stranger on the internet wanted to decide if he was a saint or a fraud. His phone buzzed nonstop. #justice for Amelia. #truth over power. The janitor who spoke. Trending. Everywhere. At first, Ethan didn't believe it. He'd spent his whole life being invisible, the kind of man people looked through, not at. Now millions of eyes were on him, dissecting every breath, every word, every wrinkle of fear on his face. Invisibility, he realized, had never been a curse. It had been mercy. The comments poured in faster than he could read. "He's lying. He's a hero. He's an actor. He's the reason I finally told my story. He's just chasing fame." People were fighting wars in his name. He sat by the window, watching the sky dim into the burnt orange of a Houston evening, and felt none of the glory the internet had assigned him. For truth, he thought, doesn't make you famous. It makes you lonely. Across town, Leonard Rowan's empire was burning. In less than 48 hours, Rowan Technologies had lost 28% of its market value. 2 board members resigned. Investors demanded an emergency meeting. But Leonard didn't panic. He smiled. His PR team flooded the internet with new headlines. "Disgruntled employee fakes abuse video for fame." "Single dad janitor faces defamation suit after false claims." "Experts question authenticity of viral footage." Paid experts, paid psychologists, paid truths. The machine was working exactly as it always did. Drown the story in noise and people would stop asking which version was real. By the time Ethan's video reached 15 million views, his apartment had turned into a war room. Two cameras from local news stations waited outside. A van from a gossip site parked across the street. Reporters shouted his name when he tried to take out the trash. He didn't answer any of them. He couldn't afford to. Instead, he sat at his small kitchen table, laptop open, email inbox flooding. Some messages offered donations, others offered death. "You're a liar. We're watching your son. Back off or disappear." Ethan shut the laptop. The screen went dark, but his reflection stared back, tired, worn, yet still standing. He whispered, "They're scared. That means the truth hurt." That night he called Ryan. "You okay, man?" Ryan asked. "I don't know. They're trying to ruin me." "They can't erase what we saw." "Maybe not," Ethan said softly, "but they can erase me." Ryan paused. "I got your back, brother. Always." It was the kind of promise men make in dark times, not sure if they can keep it, but needing to say it anyway. At 11 p.m., a message appeared in Ethan's inbox. It was short, unsigned. "I believe you, but to win, we need her voice." Clara Hensley, independent journalist. He'd seen the name before, a small profile picture beneath a pinned YouTube comment. He opened her website, her last published investigation, a pharmaceutical CEO caught laundering charity funds. The article had ended her career at a major paper. She was, like him, someone the system had quietly thrown away. Ethan hesitated only a moment before replying. "I'm listening." 2 hours later, his phone rang. A calm, deliberate female voice spoke through static. "Mr. Cole, this is Clara Hensley. I watched both of your videos." "Then you know I'm not lying." "I do," she said. "But truth isn't enough. Not against a man like Leonard Rowan." "What do you need?" Ethan asked. "I need her," Clara replied. "Amelia." Ethan froze. "She's been hidden away, likely under surveillance, with a private medical team loyal to her husband. If she doesn't speak, the story dies. If she does, the world changes." Ethan rubbed his temples. "How do you find a woman whose husband owns every camera in this city?" "You don't," Clara said. "You find the people who still remember she's human." The line went quiet for a long time. Ethan could hear Clara typing in the background, rapid, focused. Then she said, almost to herself, "There's a nurse. Maria Alvarez. She worked at the hospital Leonard owns. She's been unreachable since last year. If she's still there, she might help us get in." "And if we get caught?" Ethan asked. "Then they'll silence you for good," she said simply. "Are you sure you want to do this?" He looked at the teddy bear beside Noah's bed, its missing ears stitched in uneven thread. He thought about the night at the gala, Amelia's hand on her stomach, and the look in her eyes. "Yes," he said. "I'm sure." By morning, the internet had moved on to a new scandal, a politician's affair, a celebrity's divorce. The world that had crowned him hero 2 days ago now scrolled past his name without care. But somewhere deep in the noise, a quieter current had begun. Thousands of women writing their own stories under the same tag. #I will speak. And Ethan knew, without fully understanding how, that the real storm hadn't passed. It was only changing shape, turning from rage into courage, from outrage into movement. He looked at Noah, still asleep. Sunlight cutting through the blinds like threads of gold. Then he whispered, as if to the boy, "They think we're alone, kiddo. But we're not. Not anymore." Across the city, in a glass tower high above downtown, Leonard Rowan stood before a wall of screens. On one of them, Ethan's video still played, muted, looped, dissected by his legal team. He turned to his assistant. Get me everything on this journalist, Clara Hensley. Every call, every move. Yes, sir. And find my wife, he said coldly. Before they do. The assistant hesitated. Sir, Mrs. Rowan hasn't answered any calls for 2 days. Leonard's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. He just stared at the screen, watching the janitor's face frozen mid-sentence, the moment before defiance turned into history. Back in the small apartment on Westheimer, Ethan sat alone at the table. He opened his notebook and wrote one sentence. If silence built this empire, truth will bring it down. He closed the notebook, exhaled, and whispered, Let's find her. Because sometimes the only way to survive a storm is to walk straight into it. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and money, the kind of place where pain was politely hidden behind glass doors and soft lighting. It was past midnight when Ethan Cole and Clara Hensley stepped out of the cab. The neon sign above them read St. Alden Medical Center, glowing faintly through the fog. The same hospital that Rowan Technologies funded. The same one where Amelia was being kept silent. Are you sure about this? Ethan whispered. Clara adjusted her coat, eyes steady. No. But we don't get to be sure anymore. They moved through the sliding doors like shadows. Ethan wore his old janitor's uniform, a disguise that ironically made him invisible again. Clara followed, her press badge hidden inside her pocket. At the front desk, the night nurse looked up. Can I help you? Yes, Clara said smoothly. Maintenance check. Floor 7, private wing. The nurse frowned. No checks scheduled. New order, Clara replied, sliding a forged work order across the counter. The paper looked official enough, a trick from years of investigating places that didn't want her there. The nurse hesitated, then shrugged. Go ahead. Don't touch anything expensive. They entered the elevator. When the doors closed, Ethan exhaled. You're good at this. Clara smiled faintly. I've been sneaking into rooms full of men who thought they owned the truth. Same species, different hospital. Floor 7 was silent. Sterile hallways, motion sensors, cameras blinking red. Ethan pushed a mop bucket he'd borrowed from the janitor closet. Inside it, beneath cleaning rags, was a small recording device. They turned left, following Clara's hand-drawn map. At the end of the corridor stood a door with a brass plate. Amelia Rowan. Private care. Ethan's pulse quickened. He knocked gently. No response. He glanced at Clara. She nodded. He tried the handle. Locked. Before he could speak, the door clicked from the inside. It opened just a few inches. A woman's voice whispered, trembling, Who are you? Ethan froze, then said softly, The man from the gala. The door opened wider. Amelia stood there, pale and thin, a hospital gown draped over her shoulders. Her left eye still carried the faint yellow trace of a fading bruise. One hand rested protectively over her swollen belly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she said, You shouldn't be here. Clara stepped forward. Mrs. Rowan, I'm Clara Hensley, journalist. We're not here to hurt you. We're here because the world won't believe him without you. Amelia's eyes flickered between them, suspicion, fear, then exhaustion. She whispered, You don't know what he'll do. Yes, we do, Ethan said quietly. We've seen what he does when no one's watching. That made her flinch, not because he was wrong, but because it was true. Inside the room, everything was too clean. White orchids on the windowsill, silk curtains, a framed photo of Leonard shaking hands with the governor. Maria Alvarez, the nurse Clara had mentioned, was there too. a kind-faced woman in her 40s with dark circles under her eyes. She closed the door quickly behind them. "Señora," Maria whispered to Amelia in Spanish, "they can help." Amelia turned toward the nurse, searching her expression. Then she walked to the small bedside table and opened the drawer. Inside was a flash drive, labeled only with a date, March 12th. She held it out to Ethan. "What is this?" he asked. "Security footage from our home. I copied it before they replaced the cameras." Her voice was quiet but steady. "He doesn't know it exists." Clara's eyes widened. "What's on it?" "Everything," Amelia said. "The bruises, the threats, the nights he locked me in the study." She sank into the chair beside her bed, one hand still on her belly. "If I don't speak now, my baby will grow up in silence." "And silence is where monsters live." Outside, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Ethan froze. "Guards," Maria whispered. Clara slipped her phone into her pocket, grabbed the USB from Ethan, and turned to Amelia. "We'll get this to the press. But if they see us—" Amelia raised a trembling hand. "Wait." She reached for her phone, pressed a code, and the door lock released from inside. When the guard entered, she said firmly, "It's all right. I asked them to come." "Ma'am, these people—" "I decide who enters my room," she interrupted. The guard hesitated, glanced at the cameras, then stepped back. "Yes, Mrs. Rowan." As he left, Clara exhaled shakily. "That was close." Amelia managed a faint smile. "For years I did what he told me. Tonight, I remembered I have a voice." They stayed only a few minutes longer. Clara double-checked the footage, encrypted it, and slipped the copy into her coat. Maria promised to keep Amelia safe until morning. Before leaving, Ethan turned to her. "Why now? After everything?" She looked up, her eyes glistening with something between grief and strength. "Because you stood up when no one else did," she said softly. "You reminded me that fear only wins when it's shared." He hesitated, then nodded. "We'll make sure they hear you." Amelia's hand pressed gently against her stomach. "Then make them listen." As they left the hospital, the dawn was breaking, pale gold bleeding through the horizon. The air was cool, fresh, unreal after so many nights of fear. In the taxi, Clara stared at the flash drive in her hand. "This changes everything," she murmured. Ethan looked out the window at the awakening city, towers of glass glinting in morning light. Somewhere inside those buildings, people like Leonard still believed power was permanent. But this time, someone had proof. He turned to Clara. "What happens now?" She looked at him, a tired but certain fire in her eyes. "Now," she said, "the world finally sees." Back in her hospital room, Amelia sat by the window, watching the sun rise. Maria poured her a glass of water and said softly, "You did the right thing, Señora." Amelia smiled faintly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "For once, I think I did." She touched her belly. "Maybe my child will be born in a quieter world." And in that fragile morning light, the first true light after years of silence, Amelia Rowan began to believe that speaking might save not just herself, but everyone who had ever been told to stay quiet. That morning, the flash drive reached Clara's newsroom. By noon, every major outlet was calling. By nightfall, the story had a name: The Woman Who Finally Spoke. And for the first time in her life, Amelia Rowan's voice wasn't trembling. It was breaking the world open. It began with a headline, then a whisper, then a roar. By dawn, every major outlet in America was running the story. The Woman Who Finally Spoke. Amelia Rowan breaks silence. The article wasn't sensational. It didn't need to be. It had what power feared most: evidence. The video from the gala, the home footage from the Rowan mansion, the voice recording of Leonard's threats, and Clara Hensley's name on the byline. In their one-bedroom apartment, Ethan and Noah sat together on the couch. Noah was still in his pajamas, clutching his half-eared teddy bear. Ethan held a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. On the TV, the world was finally catching up to the truth. And in a shocking revelation this morning, independent journalist Clara Hensley has released footage confirming long-standing allegations of abuse against billionaire tech mogul Leonard Rowan. Amelia's face appeared on the screen. Not the glamorous one from magazine covers, but a quiet, pale woman sitting in her hospital gown, hands folded over her belly. Her voice shook only once when she said, "For years, I was told silence was love, that speaking out would destroy everything. But silence nearly killed me, and my child." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Noah looked up at him, eyes wide. "Dad? That's her?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, buddy. That's her." The boy whispered, "She's brave." "She is," Ethan said. "So are you." By noon, the story had gone global. CNN, BBC, Reuters, Al Jazeera, talk shows, podcasts, news feeds, late-night hosts. Everyone was talking about the janitor, the journalist, and the woman who'd finally said, "Enough." Celebrities reposted the footage. Oprah called it a reckoning. Michelle Obama wrote, "Silence protects the powerful. Truth protects the living." The White House issued a brief statement about the courage of survivors. The world, for once, had chosen to listen. At Rowan Technologies, panic spread faster than any virus. Lawyers flooded the boardroom. Stock values plunged 28% within hours. 2 executives resigned live on CNBC. Leonard Rowan refused interviews. He stood in his penthouse office. The skyline reflected in the glass like fractured light. On his desk, 3 phones rang at once. Lawyers, investors, crisis managers. He ignored them all. In front of him, on a muted TV, Ethan's face appeared again. The janitor with the bruise. The man who had nothing but the truth. Leonard turned the volume up just enough to hear the reporter say, "Public outrage continues as millions rally behind #Justice for Amelia and #Stand with Ethan." His hand clenched around a crystal tumbler until it shattered. Meanwhile, Clara Hensley hadn't slept in 30 hours. Her small apartment looked like a command center. Laptops, chargers, phones, sticky notes, and 3 cups of coffee gone cold. Her inbox overflowed with messages. Survivors, lawyers, nonprofits, even senators. One caught her eye. From Oprah Network. Subject, interview request. Amelia Rowan and Ethan Cole. Clara smiled faintly. For the first time since the story broke, she allowed herself a single exhale of pride. Then her phone buzzed. "Ethan," she answered immediately. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. "It's all over the news." "I know," she said. "You did it." "No," Ethan replied softly. "She did." Clara paused. "You both did." That evening, Houston's courthouse square filled with candles. Thousands gathered, strangers, mothers, students, janitors, teachers. They held signs that read, "Enough," "Believe women," and "My dad is my hero." Ethan and Noah stood quietly in the crowd. Noah wore his red hoodie, the same one from his first day of school. He held his father's hand tightly. A woman approached, mid-30s, holding a candle. "You're Ethan, right?" she said gently. "The janitor?" He nodded. She smiled through tears. "Thank you." My sister went through the same thing. She didn't make it. You made people listen. Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded and whispered, "For her, too." Later that night, back home, he found Noah sitting at the kitchen table with crayons scattered everywhere. "What are you drawing?" Ethan asked. Noah grinned. "A new picture." He held it up proudly. This time, the crayon drawing showed 3 figures: Ethan, Noah, and Amelia. Above them, the same shaky handwriting spelled, "My dad is still my hero." Ethan felt tears rise before he could stop them. He crouched, hugged his son tight, and whispered, "You make me brave, kiddo." Across town, Amelia watched the news coverage from her hospital bed. Maria stood beside her, hand resting gently on her shoulder. The anchor's voice carried through the room. "In a landmark shift, multiple corporate donors have suspended contracts with Rowan Technologies pending investigation." Amelia closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She thought of Ethan's voice that night. "Please stop. She's pregnant." She smiled faintly. Maybe the world wasn't healed, but it was, at last, awake. That same night, Ethan's phone rang again. It was Clara. "The district attorney's office wants statements," she said. "They're moving forward with charges. They're calling it the trial of the silent room." Ethan looked out the window, where the city lights flickered like distant stars. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt ready. "Tell them I'll be there," he said quietly. "All of us will." And so, for the first time, truth wasn't just surviving online. It was standing on its feet, walking toward the courtroom. Because sometimes justice doesn't begin with power or law. Sometimes it begins with one voice in a crowded room saying, "Enough." The courthouse on Smith Street had seen its share of scandals: politicians, executives, men who'd traded ethics for empire, but never anything like this. On that gray Monday morning, cameras lined the steps. Reporters shouted questions that got lost in the rain. Security held back crowds waving signs that read, "Justice for Amelia." No one is above the truth. Silence is a crime. Inside, the marble halls smelled of wet umbrellas and tension. Ethan Cole stood near the back, adjusting the borrowed Navy suit that hung a little loose around the shoulders. It had been Ryan's idea. Every hero deserves a jacket that fits the story. Ryan Torres was beside him now, fidgeting with his tie. Clara Hensley stood across from them, phone in hand, typing notes like her life depended on it. And in the front row sat Amelia Rowan, hands clasped over her belly, face calm, spine straight. Across the aisle, Leonard Rowan entered surrounded by lawyers, tall, immaculate, expression carved from arrogance. His cufflinks gleamed. His wedding ring was gone. The two sides of the room couldn't have been more different. On one, fear disguised as wealth. On the other, truth disguised as courage. Judge Marianne Keller entered. A hush rippled through the chamber. "All rise." The trial had begun. The prosecution's opening statement was measured, steady, devastating. It played the footage from the gala, the slap, the silence, the janitor stepping forward. The jurors leaned forward unconsciously. Then came the home footage from the USB, Leonard shouting, doors slamming, Amelia's muffled cries. A single juror covered her mouth. Another looked away. And when they played Ethan's first video, "If you touch her again, I swear I'll bring your whole empire down." The entire courtroom felt that electric, impossible mix of horror and awe. The defense tried everything. They painted Ethan as a fame-hungry opportunist. They called the footage deeply edited. They questioned Amelia's credibility, calling her emotionally unstable. When they spoke, Leonard sat perfectly still, as if sculpted from ice. His gaze met Amelia's only once, and she didn't look away. Amelia's testimony came on the third day. She walked slowly to the stand, the soft rhythm of her breath audible in the microphone. For a moment, she just sat there, hands trembling, eyes scanning the crowded courtroom. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of years, she began. I met Leonard when I was 22. He was brilliant, charming, the kind of man who fills a room and makes you believe you're lucky just to stand in it. The first time he hit me, he cried afterward. Told me he was stressed, that it would never happen again. I believed him. And then it happened again. And again. Until believing him meant disappearing piece by piece. From my friends, my family, myself. The courtroom was silent. Even the clicking cameras in the back stopped. When I got pregnant, I thought it would change him. But it only made him worse. Because now he owned not just me, but what I carried. He told me, no one will ever believe you, and I believed that too. Her voice broke, once, then steadied. Until one night, a man I'd never met stood up for me when no one else did, a janitor, a stranger. And that moment, that single sentence, gave me back my voice. Amelia looked directly at Leonard. You were wrong. Someone believed me. The words rippled through the room like thunder. When it was Ethan's turn to testify, he didn't have a speech prepared. He stood before the microphone, palms sweating, eyes on the jury. I'm not a hero, he began quietly. I just couldn't look away. I've cleaned floors my whole life. I've seen what people throw away, not just trash, but kindness, decency, courage. People forget that those things need taking care of, too. That night, I saw something no one wanted to see, and I thought about my son. He made a drawing that said my dad is my hero. I didn't feel like one. I still don't. But I wanted to be the kind of man he could believe in. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. Leonard Rowan built an empire. I just cleaned around it. But truth doesn't care how high your tower is. It still finds a way in. Someone in the back whispered, Amen. The defense attorney tried to corner him. You admit you filmed without consent? Yes. You admit you trespassed into a private conversation? I admit I refused to look away from a crime. The attorney frowned. So you think you're some kind of savior? Ethan met his eyes. No, sir. I just think someone had to stop pretending. By the fifth day, the trial had become national theater. Outside, protesters filled the square. Survivors of abuse held candles. Students sang softly. Inside, truth took the stand again and again. Maria Alvarez, Ryan Torres, even Clara herself. She described how she'd received the footage, verified it, risked her career to publish it. I did it, she said, because journalism isn't about power. It's about restoring voices to those who've been muted. When Leonard finally testified, his arrogance cracked. He denied everything. Then contradicted himself. Then lost his temper. The jury watched the man behind the empire unravel. At one point, he slammed his hand on the table, shouting, You think anyone will believe a janitor over me? Ethan didn't move. Neither did Amelia. The courtroom saw the irony for what it was. The same sentence that once silenced a room now convicted him in one. Closing arguments came on the 8th day. The prosecutor's voice was calm, almost gentle. This case isn't about wealth versus poverty. It's about silence versus truth. The people in this courtroom have learned what power really means. Power isn't how many zeros sit in your account. It's whether you use your voice when no one else will." When she finished, the judge called for recess. The jurors left. The city waited. Hours passed. Then the doors reopened. The forewoman of the jury stood. Her voice was clear. "We find the defendant, Leonard Rowan, guilty on all counts." The room erupted. Reporters shouting, flashbulbs exploding, people crying quietly. Ethan closed his eyes. Amelia covered her face, and for the first time in years, she smiled through tears. Leonard sat motionless as the bailiff read the sentence. 8 years in prison, asset forfeiture, lifetime restraining order. The sound of the gavel was final, echoing through the chamber like the closing of a wound. Outside the courthouse, rain had stopped. The clouds parted just enough for a single shaft of sunlight to touch the steps. Ethan found Amelia there, standing beneath the open sky. He handed her a folded napkin. She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "We did." She looked out at the crowd, strangers chanting her name, women holding signs, children sitting on their fathers' shoulders. Her voice was barely a whisper, but Ethan heard it. "We can't let this end with just a trial." He nodded. "Then we won't." As reporters closed in, flashes lighting the wet pavement, Ethan looked up at the courthouse steps, at the hundreds of faces lit by hope, at the candles flickering in paper cups. For years, silence had ruled this city. Now it was being drowned out by 1,000 ordinary voices. He turned to Amelia, her hand resting gently on her belly, and smiled. "Let's build something new," he said. And in that moment, beneath the fading sound of thunder, she believed him. The headlines the next morning would call it "The Trial That Changed Everything." But for Ethan Cole, it wasn't about history. It was about one quiet promise he'd finally kept, that his son would never grow up learning silence. The verdict rippled through Houston like a bell that refused to stop ringing. For weeks, the city had been holding its breath. Now it exhaled. Leonard Rowan, once called the visionary of the South, now sat behind reinforced glass in the county detention center, awaiting transfer to federal custody. 8 years. 8 long years. And the empire that once silenced hundreds began to crumble, piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, rain had washed the last of the protest posters from the steps. What remained were flowers, candles, and quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't fear anymore. It was peace. Ethan Cole stood in that silence, one arm around Noah, the other holding the folded letter of his final court summons. He had testified, told the truth, and now there was nothing left to defend. "Are we done, Dad?" Noah asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Almost, kiddo. Almost." That afternoon, the judge signed the restitution order. 70% of Leonard's assets would be liquidated. The proceeds, over $1 billion, would go to a newly created fund for victims of domestic violence, the Haven Foundation. It was Amelia's idea. Her signature was the first on the charter. Ethan's was the second. When Amelia met Ethan again, it wasn't in a hospital or a courtroom, but on the empty rooftop of the courthouse garage under the pink wash of dawn. She wore a gray coat and no makeup. Her eyes were tired but clear. "I didn't think it would end like this," she said softly. "It hasn't ended," Ethan replied. "It's just quieter." They stood for a long while without speaking. The city hummed below. Cars, sirens, morning news anchors repeating their names. Finally, Amelia said, "Do you know what I thought about during the verdict?" Ethan shook his head. "The silence," she whispered. "All those nights I wished someone would break it, and then you did." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I wasn't brave," he said. "I was scared out of my mind." She smiled faintly. That's what bravery usually feels like. Downstairs, reporters waited for a quote, but neither of them gave one. They had already said enough. Some truths don't need microphones. They just need to exist. Before they parted, Amelia reached into her coat pocket and handed him something small and folded. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures, a man, a woman, and a small child, standing beneath a bright orange sun. At the top, in clumsy handwriting, were 5 words. My dad is my hero. Ethan froze. How? Your son sent it, she said. He mailed it to my lawyer last week. Said it was for the lady his dad helped. Ethan laughed softly, the sound breaking somewhere between joy and ache. He looked at the paper again, his hands trembling. Guess he wanted to share it, Amelia said, smiling through tears. He wanted you to know it's real. Later that evening, the television networks called the trial a landmark for accountability. The stock market called it a tragedy for investors. But the people who'd been watching quietly from their own small prisons, the women, the janitors, the nurses, the sons, they called it something else. Hope. Because for the first time, someone had stood up and the world hadn't looked away. The next morning, Ethan and Noah visited a small park near the river. No cameras, no reporters, just a father and son, walking along the path lined with oak trees dripping from the rain. Noah ran ahead, chasing pigeons, laughing. Ethan watched him. The wind tugging at his coat, the sunlight breaking through clouds like mercy itself. When the boy ran back, he said, Dad, are we still heroes? Ethan knelt down, brushing the hair from his son's eyes. No, he said gently. We're just people who didn't stay quiet. Noah thought for a moment, then nodded. I think heroes do that too. Ethan laughed, scooped him up, and spun him in the air until they were both dizzy with something that felt dangerously close to peace. That night, as he tucked Noah into bed, Ethan saw the teddy bear, the same one with the stitched ear, sitting on the pillow. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and smiled. Guess we both made it, huh? He set it beside Noah and looked once more at the drawing taped to the wall. My dad is my hero. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass like constellations rearranging themselves, new patterns forming where the old ones had broken. In another part of town, Amelia signed the final documents for the Haven Foundation. The first safe shelter was being built in an old library, the same one she'd once donated to for PR. Now it would hold women, children, stories, voices that would never be silenced again. Clara Hensley's article had won the National Journalism Award that week. Ryan had accepted a job managing the foundation's kitchen. Ethan would oversee operations, balancing ledgers instead of mops. It wasn't glory. It was purpose. On the opening day, Amelia stood before the small crowd gathered under a pale blue banner that read, The Haven Center. The building behind her smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Ethan stood beside her, Noah at his leg, clutching the teddy bear. Amelia stepped to the microphone, voice clear, steady, unshakable. This place was built by voices that refused to disappear. It stands for every woman who was told no one would believe her, and for every man who proved that belief is the beginning of change. She paused, looked toward Ethan. Evil doesn't always roar, she said softly. Sometimes it's just the silence of a crowded room. But light only needs one person to say, enough. The crowd rose in quiet applause. Ethan looked down at Noah, who whispered, You said that before. Ethan smiled. Guess she heard me. The boy grinned. You should say it again. He looked up at the sunlight spilling through the windows, dust turning to gold in the air. And for the first time since that night in the ballroom, Ethan Cole felt something he hadn't dared to feel in years. Forgiveness. For the world. For her. For himself. That evening, as the sun melted behind the skyline, the new sign above the door gleamed with 3 simple words: The Haven Foundation. And beneath it, carved into bronze, a dedication that read, For every voice that was ever told to stay quiet. And in the quiet of that dawn, when the janitor finally laid down his broom, the world, at last, had learned to listen. A year later, the world had moved on, as it always does. But in one corner of Houston, something lasting had been built from what once was broken. At the intersection of Willow and Tanglewood stood a building made of soft white stone and glass, surrounded by gardens of yellow tulips and small wind chimes that sang with every breeze. Above its entrance, in gentle bronze letters, was a name the city had come to know: the Haven Foundation. It didn't look like a courtroom or a corporation. It looked like peace. Inside, laughter echoed through the halls. Children playing, volunteers carrying boxes of donated clothes, nurses walking with women whose eyes were still learning how to meet daylight again. The walls were painted in sunlight tones: pale amber, warm cream, the color of beginnings. And in the lobby, framed in a gold border above the reception desk, hung a single drawing. Crayon lines, bright and imperfect, spelling out 5 words that had changed everything. My dad is my hero. Ethan Cole walked down the hallway with a clipboard under his arm. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His badge read Director of Operations, but everyone here still called him Ethan. He stopped near the art room where his son Noah, now 8, was sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by crayons and a dozen other children. Noah looked up, grinning. "Dad, we're making storybooks for the new families." Ethan crouched beside him, smiling. "You're the expert, huh?" Noah nodded. "I told them heroes are just people who help other people." Ethan's heart tightened. "That's a good definition, buddy." The boy shrugged. "It's yours." In the office upstairs, Amelia Rowan adjusted the microphone on the small stage. Her nameplate on the desk read, President, the Haven Foundation. She still spoke softly, but there was strength in it now, not the brittle kind that hides behind money, but the kind born from surviving one's own silence. She was preparing for the anniversary ceremony. 1 year since the verdict, 1 year since the empire of fear had fallen. When Ethan entered the room, she smiled. "You're late." He handed her a folder. "Paperwork doesn't respect anniversaries." "Neither do memories," she said quietly, closing the folder. They both turned toward the large window overlooking the garden. Down below, women sat on benches beneath the tulips. One laughed, one cried, one held a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. "That's what it's for," Amelia whispered. "Not the headlines. Them." Ethan nodded. "You gave them somewhere to start again." She shook her head. "We did." Across the lobby, Ryan Torres stood at the kitchen window wearing an apron that read, "The best meals are shared." Steam rose from a row of pots, filling the air with the scent of rosemary and garlic. He stirred, grinned, and shouted toward the hallway, "Hey, Ethan, you want the roast done by 6, or do I let the board wait?" Ethan laughed. "Feed them first, inspire them after." Ryan chuckled. "That's your motto for everything, boss." Then it's working. Later that afternoon, the lobby filled with people, survivors, donors, reporters, and children chasing balloons. Clara Hensley arrived last, her press badge tucked into her pocket. She wasn't covering the story anymore. She was part of it. Her latest book, The Night No One Spoke, had just won the National Press Award. But when she walked into the Haven, she didn't feel like a journalist. She felt like a witness. Amelia hugged her. "You kept your promise." Clara smiled. "No, you did. I just wrote it down." As evening fell, the ceremony began. Soft golden light filled the room. Volunteers dimmed the overhead lamps, and a hush settled. Amelia took the stage, her voice calm, deliberate, healing. 1 year ago, truth walked into a courtroom and the world listened. But what mattered wasn't the headlines. It was what came after. Tonight, we honor not a verdict, but a beginning. She paused, looking at the crowd, at faces that had once been afraid to be seen. The Haven Foundation exists for every woman who was told she was too small to fight, for every child who was told their voice didn't matter, and for every man who believed decency was weakness. We are here because one janitor refused to look away. All eyes turned to Ethan. He shifted uncomfortably, but Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Go on, Dad." Ethan stood, cleared his throat, and stepped up beside her. "I didn't plan to say anything," he began, "because the truth doesn't need speeches. It needs action. But my son once told me heroes are just people who help other people. If that's true, then everyone in this room is a hero." He looked around, at Clara, at Ryan, at Maria, the nurse standing near the door, at Amelia. "And if silence built the world we came from," he said softly, "then maybe kindness can build the one we deserve." The audience rose in quiet applause, not thunderous, not dramatic, but full of warmth, like a collective heartbeat. Later, when the guests had left and the building had gone still, Ethan walked through the empty halls alone. The air smelled of new paint and candle wax. The floor beneath his steps gleamed, not with polish, but with purpose. He stopped by the framed drawing one last time. The crayon lines seemed almost alive in the soft lamplight. He reached out, touched the glass. Then he whispered, half to himself, half to the boy who'd made it, "You were right, Noah. We are heroes. All of us." Outside, the night had cleared. Houston shimmered under a pale half-moon. The wind moved gently through the garden, brushing the tulips and carrying the faint laughter of children up through the open windows. In the director's office, Amelia turned off the last light. "Good night, Ethan," she said softly. He smiled. "Good night, Amelia." They stood for a moment, looking out at the city, a city no longer afraid of its own reflection. At the edge of the garden, a new plaque had been set that morning. It read, "Dedicated to every voice that chose to speak. Founded by those who refused to look away. The Haven Foundation, where silence ends and healing begins." As the wind passed through the courtyard chimes, Ethan whispered the words that had once broken a room, now softened by time and grace. "If you touch her again, I swear I'll bring your whole empire down." But this time, there was no threat in it, only memory, only faith that the world had changed. He looked toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to gather, and with the first light of morning spilling through the glass, the janitor who had once been invisible smiled, because he finally understood he hadn't torn down an empire. He had built a home.